Hi there. This video is going to examine the topic of population, food security, and rights, and is part of a video series looking at the relationship between food and consumption, as well as food, uh, population rather. So let's look at the issue of food security first. This is an important concept for this topic, and it's a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life, according to the FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization that came out of the 1996 World Food Summit. Uh, Rocha identifies five different elements to food security. They are: the food has to be available, it has to be adequate, it has to be accessible, it has to be acceptable, so it has to be a match to food preferences, and there has to be agency. There has to be some ability of members of society to choose their food. And based on these five criteria, we can evaluate where different nations stand with regard to their food security. And there's two basic perspectives that we can take when we think about food security. The first of these is what we call the productivist, which is mainly focused on increasing the supply of food. And a lot of that is through the use of new technologies. The other perspective is what we call the social ecological perspective, which involves an array of root problems, not just food itself, not the supply. So the productivist, the first perspective there, is an agricultural orientation that's technologically driven. This technology can involve genetic modification, nanotechnology, genomics, irrigation technologies, and computerization, all delivering the goal of more food from less land, resource, energy, and water, etc., according to Lang and Barling. So the policies that would be advocated from this perspective would be anything that would increase output, encourage adoption and diffusion of technology, maybe subsidize different technologies. From the other perspective or paradigm, the social ecological, this is much more complex. It's a multifaceted approach, examining a range of underlying issues that go much deeper than just increasing the supply of food. So the policy here has really more to do with social injustices, right? Really improving access and availability of food. There have been different analyses of food security uh, in the literature. This is reviewed by Lang and Barling. The focus, the comparison of the old food security perspective versus the emerging or sustainable food analysis approach. So with regard to the core concern, the route to food security, again, underproduction is the productivist orientation. The social ecological paradigm, which has to do with sustainability, is the mismatch of production, consumption, and policy. The route to food security is to produce more for the productivist. For the social ecologist, it's to redesign the food system to be more sustainable across multiple criteria, not just in terms of productivity, but in terms of social, environmental, and economic concerns. Uh, Analysis of the 2007-2008 crisis from the old perspective was a sudden crisis caused by external shocks in the banking system. From the new perspective, this is a long-running failure coming to a head, exposing already existing vulnerabilities in the system. In terms of the preferred action, the old productivist paradigm is improving coordination among international food bodies, providing better information on national productivity levels and food stocks. The new perspective, it's begin a twin track short and long term reorientation of food supply and consumption patterns, better aligning the environmental health and inequality issues, rebuild buffer stocks as a safety net. In terms of health, The old productivist concern is with malnutrition and hunger, whereas the new concern is with a wide range of diseases, including malnutrition. Environmental concerns, the old paradigm is primarily focused on farm, whereas the new paradigm looks throughout the entire system. In terms of waste, again, farm orientation, farm waste and distribution is the old paradigm. The new paradigm, again, system-wide life cycle analysis, which we looked at in previous videos. In terms of consumer issues, the issue in the old paradigm is underconsumption. The new paradigm, it's overconsumption, or especially the distribution of consumption, looking at overconsumption among the wealthy, underconsumption among the poor. The energy focus, the old paradigm, it's land use for energy generation. The new paradigm, it's carbon emissions throughout the food chain, because climate change is a central concern in this social ecological paradigm. In terms of geographic hotspots, the focus of the old paradigm is low-income developing countries, pushing more energy-intensive technologies. For example, the new perspective is a global perspective, not just looking at the low-income countries, but also examining markets that connect rich and poor countries. The economic approach, the old paradigm, generate efficient supply. The new paradigm, internalize full costs. Right, so not externalizing the cost of production. The role of science, the old paradigm is promoting research and development in agriculture primarily. The new paradigm is also focusing on the social as well as natural sciences. And the locus of power, the old paradigm is mainly government, but also commercial interests investing in agricultural productivity. The new paradigm is a split between private governance, commerce, and government, as well as a focus on international institutions and regimes and global governance, because the global system is in fact a global system, a global food system. So the new role for food companies, shifting away from this productivist to a more social ecological paradigm. Companies are, at least in terms of rhetoric, shifting to this new paradigm of adopting sustainability initiatives. And the question is whether or not this is a sincere adoption or if it's just kind of lip service. In other words, are we really seeing a movement to sustainability initiatives, or are we just being greenwashed or grainwashed by these companies so they have a reputation that makes them appear to be sustainable when they go on conducting their business as usual? So those are really empirical questions that require us to study these companies and their activities. But most major food companies are adopting at least the rhetoric of sustainability. And now the question is about accountability. So is food security even a useful term? Some suggest that we need to move to a new concept of food sovereignty. In this new paradigm, looking at promoting greater self-sufficiency among poor countries, for instance. In other words, shifting away from commodity production to food production for local consumption is part of this package. But here we're going to see those paradigms kind of come into conflict, because the old paradigm, encouraged by the IMF and the World Bank, is that poor countries should be growing the most profitable commodities, not necessarily food sources that could be consumed by the domestic market. So the new paradigm does encourage that, because food sovereignty is prioritized for its social and environmental benefits, even if profits might come in a little lower. So in terms of food sovereignty, we do see a global peasant movement that endorses this notion, led by the Via Campesina movement. And food security doesn't necessarily pay attention to where food comes from. So having more food self-sufficiency at the national level would certainly go a long way in bolstering food security, but food sovereignty ensures that we know where that food's coming from and it's a domestic source, where it's possible at least. So a truly sustainable approach to ensuring food security implies some level of food sovereignty, which implies self-sufficiency. Lang and Barling, in their analysis, identify several competing concepts here, or terms, that revolve around food security. One of those is autarky, which is really trying to be totally self-sufficient. And there are a few people who endorse or advocate that extreme position. There's really no reason to totally cut off global trade. But that doesn't mean we can't go further in promoting some level of food sovereignty. As you can see, that's on the table here as well, as sort of an ideal model. But some of the other ones, food nationalism, food democracy, food defense, food capacity, food control, food resilience, food rights, food risks, these are all things that need to be considered. Food welfare, food sustainability, uh, not necessarily to the exclusion of others. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're just different terms used to describe the same thing. But it seems that there's some consensus forming around this sovereignty concept, aligning the action of social movements, sustainability, balancing profits versus social and ecological outcomes that are equally important. All right. All right, so that's it for this discussion. We'll continue a discussion of food rights in another video. Thanks.